we're excited to talk to you, and we are because I think what we've heard repeatedly today is that the back office is now the front line. For decades, the industry's operated on a very comfortable myth that it's easy to find the person, cheap to seize the car, and that the collection of costs is almost certain. But that myth has become an existential risk. In this market, we must lend to recover and recover to keep lending. If we can't dispose of our assets efficiently, then we can't afford to originate the next ones the next day. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. I didn't expect to be. Taylor hyped me up outside. Our panels often treat the back end as a bit of a logistics graveyard, but the truth is that the recovery of the asset is ultimately the discovery of the risk. Recoveries are no longer the end of the life cycle, but instead part of the strategic heartbeat of originations. We have an amazing panel for you today. We've got Brian from EBlock, Taylor from Copart, and Jerry from Canada Auctions. These guys see the canary in the coal mines before any of the rest of us. And so we have about 25 minutes, right, Gary, to decide, is the remarketer of the future a car guy, like it has been, or is it maybe a data analyst with a dashboard? So let's jump in. We'll go to Taylor first. So Taylor, a bit of a two-part question for you. There's a lot of talk about valuation tools being gospel. Is that actually the case? And what specific back-end data should be informing front-end originations decisions? And is industry reliance on generalized data actually causing lenders to over-leverage on certain assets?
Great question. A very loaded question, too, might I add. And I'll keep the hype going here. So before I start, I want to be very clear. It's not valuation tools versus the car person's instinct. It's more so looking at how we're using that data in everyday action, if you will. So valuation tools are incredible. They provide a baseline for us. The problem is within the question, when they're treated as gospel and not necessarily a baseline that has a moving lever to it, if you will. Same thing with the car person and their instinct. The one thing that they're not taking into consideration is circumstance. Let's be honest. We all know a car person that can look at a car, hear a car, perhaps even smell it, and know exactly what's wrong with that vehicle. But they don't necessarily know where that car is sitting, what the regional demands might be, and some of the problems that could come from it. And one of the struggles that we have on the recovery and remarketing side is our part of the process is looked at as a piece of the logistics puzzle and not necessarily a tool to help determine loss severity, which is really what we do. When you think about it, we get the vehicle, we move the vehicle, we sell the vehicle, and every step of that puzzle has a financial consequence that ultimately impacts that balance for you. So things like where the vehicle's located or the transportation costs, what buyer pool it's getting to. All of that plays a factor when determining the vehicle. So that kind of back-end data could really help on the front end in informing decisions. When we look at taking averages and instincts of people, we're definitely opening up margin for determination and perhaps over-leveraging in certain scenarios. When we take that back-end data and factor in all the pieces, so for example, you might have a mid-size SUV in a certain region that's underperforming. Well, that region might have transportation struggles. It might have a buyer-based problem, or perhaps that SUV itself might have common issues that the buyer base knows about that you're not privy to because you're not buying it at end of life. So you're not factoring it into the front-end decision. So the real success would be taking all three of those pieces, right? You have the car person's instinct, you have the valuation tools baseline, and then you have the back-end data either confirming or challenging that assumption to help you make more informed decisions.
Thanks, Taylor. Just to press in a little bit on kind of the invisibility of some of this to the lender, Jerry, when you've talked about when a borrower is in distress, one of the first things that they stop doing is really regular maintenance and oil changes. And so you guys see distressed inventory hitting the lanes in pretty terrible shape. Are there elements of condition decay that are not necessarily making it back to the originations channels?
Yeah, there's a lot of peaches that are coming down the pipeline with recovered vehicles. The thing is that unfortunately they're not being taken care of. If they're not making their payments, 9 times out of 10, they're not doing the oil changes. They're not, servicing the vehicle to keep it in tip-top shape when we get them. So that's why we are telling our customers to really look at our condition report. That's not important. To look at the condition report, to look at the pictures, to actually look at what we are your eyes and ears at looking at these vehicles. Since everything has happened through COVID, we don't get the reps coming to the sales as much as we used to. And with that being said, we take the responsibility. We're your eyes and ears. We're going to tell you everything that we can see with this car, how many lights are on the vehicle. We'll try to send it to our shop, make sure that we can clear codes. It's just, we urge that the people that are pricing the vehicles really look at the condition report. And we have gone as far as to say to the lender or whatever, we'll just buy the car. You tell us what the number is for your vehicle and what you need for it. We'll just cut you a check and we'll handle the remarketing piece of it. And 9 times out of 10, the reason why we do that is because we know that that the lenders, they just need that asset liquidated, get it in, get it out. Let's use that money for something else.
So just to press on that a bit, maybe to Brian, at auction, you guys are seeing the assets, like Jerry just said, and a lot of the 23 and 24 vintages are coming in pretty poor condition. We know that as the auction, you ultimately want to help the sellers get the most for their vehicle, and Canada Auctions is talking about purchasing those units directly. But there's also a little bit of tension about the OEMs wanting to maintain residuals, about dealerships wanting to protect profit margins. So how much of today's origination risk is being silently created by this absence of data flow back to the underwriting teams? And is there a lag that is potentially causing them to overestimate value?
Yeah, Jerry mentioned an interesting point, and the point is very true, is that in the repo or asset life cycle, the only person who ever sees or touches that car is the auction that ultimately remarkets it, other than the dealer who originates that deal. But if you're in indirect lending, you've never seen the car, you've never touched the car, you're 100% reliant on whatever data the dealer has given you at the time of funding, which also allows for things like misrepresentation on trim and wrong VINs and all kinds of things. You mentioned later model year units, so 2024, 2025, and now 26 model year units. That's actually, I think I heard the word fraud at least 193 times today, and the word bust out maybe 192. But that's actually an interesting kind of piece of what we're seeing with auction inventory now, is some of that bust out inventory is some of the cleanest inventory that's coming back. When it's a credit loss and when it's a repo, generally those cars haven't even been driven, right? It's just been shipped somewhere, found in a container, or discovered in somebody's driveway. They come back with no mileage on them and very, very clean. But the data that ultimately feeds the front end of the business is what happens at our facility. So, most of the guidebook companies out there are, taking into account wholesale auction data when they're looking at setting residual values. So much like a captive finance or an OEM is very, 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 very concerned with protecting residual values, I think also ought to be companies who are selling repossessed vehicles. I mean, if we all get more money for the cars that we're selling at auction, better residual values, better LTVs when they're coming in the front door. Having come from a career where I've also sold probably a few thousand repossessed vehicles in my past, that kind of LTV piece is really, really interesting and unique. There's some lenders that we've sold cars on behalf of, and we'll present bids on cars, and we'll say, hey, we know you wanted 10 grand for this 10-year-old Honda Civic with 300,000 K on it, but the highest bid we got is 8,100 today. And they'll say, well, but the guy owes me $30,000. Well, I can't find that $30,000 for you. That's what you did at the front end when you advanced, 150, 170% LTV. One thing I've always found very helpful from a pricing perspective to try to get used to what the market's actually willing to bear is don't look at that number. If you're responsible for pricing cars and remarketing vehicles, don't look at the loan balance. Don't look at the residual value. That mattered 4 years ago. It doesn't matter today. What matters is the market price, and the market price again isn't necessarily a rolling 6-month average. It's what's happening in the auction lanes today. Instant valuation.
So we're talking a little bit about pricing strategy. We've talked about condition and wear, and I'll direct this to Taylor first, although I suspect there's probably some strong opinions across the board. As sellers are pushing to get the highest value for the vehicles at market, and this is a little bit of an art rather than a science, is there such a thing as overspending on polishing an asset for sale, or really where's the fine line between reconditioning and then just taking the first money?
Absolutely. Which is probably not the answer that most of you want to hear in this room, but it is true. And for those who aren't familiar, Copart started their origin within insurance total loss salvage vehicles. So we consider ourselves experts in damaged vehicles. And there is a point where additional spend is not going to have any impact on buyer appetite. A damaged unit is a damaged unit. If it has mechanical or structural damage to it, cosmetic upgrades or small incremental features or polishes on them isn't going to make a decision on your final sale price. So it's best to just take clean and first money on those units. The real trick is understanding your inventory and decisioning it properly. And that's where an auction segmentation strategy really comes into play. Each auction provider up here, each auction provider across the country, across North America, has a niche. Know what their niche is and understand your inventory so you can segment your inventory correctly. Getting the right vehicle into the right lane with the right audience, sell it quickly. Yes, perhaps you'll take a lower gross, but your net return will be stronger because you moved through that asset quicker and got it to the right buyer base. Now, don't get me wrong. There are absolutely circumstances where you should be reconditioning those vehicles and selling them in different lanes. But that's the difference in knowing the inventory and knowing exactly where it should be and what type of return you're looking for.
This is a little off the cuff, but in our prep call for this session, Brian, you shared an analogy with us that likened remarketing to the real estate market. I'm going to extend it out a little bit in the concept of kind of staging your home or doing the kitchen renovation versus selling it as is because someone's going to tear it down. But do you want to fill in the blanks a little bit with the comparison you made for us?
Yeah, sure. And all I was talking about there is, again, when it comes to pricing an asset and what you expect true market value to be, the market value of that asset is not based on, the Toronto region real estate guide. The price of that asset is based on what sold on the street where you're selling your house in the last week or 30 days. It's based on specific transactional data. So that's what I mean. There is kind of a good analogy there in that, the data that you want to be looking at is real time, what's actually happening in the wholesale market. And then when it comes to the value, the services that we offer as auctions here, yeah, I mean, you think about it as a real estate agent or a home stager. A home stager is going to make your house look different than the others. It's going to make it look better. It's going to bring more eyes, more bidders. That's what an auction does. All three of us at the core of our business put eyes on cars. We do a lot of other things, but that is the core of an auction business, is to bring bidders to bid on your inventory, hopefully sell it for more money. If we can stage your houses, if we can stage your inventory, so clean it, do the steam clean on the fabric, shampoo the engine bay, whatever it is, remove the dents, there is definitely value there. And again, I know there's a lot of OEMs and captives in the room. Those are generally the companies that will spend $1 to make $1. You're going to put $1 into a car at an auction to get $1 out because you want to prop up that residual value. And you're not losing anything by doing it. When it comes to banks, it's a little bit more difficult because now you're talking about potentially pursuing somebody for that deficiency balance, right? So if you're asked to spend $1,000 to fix a caved-in rocker panel, can you prove to who you're about to sue after that car sells that enhanced the value of the car? I think there's enough data out there now to prove some of those concepts.
And just to jump in here quickly, going back to the damaged assets piece, there are some units that are just fundamentally broken where you're going to have that data to support it, but it doesn't necessarily make sense. So a lot of it is circumstantial. And just like the real estate board, cycle time is everything. So knowing when to sell your house is really the key, right? Because if you hit in the right market, you're going to have a great return. If you put your house on the market in a downturn, you might not have the same return that you'd like. So it's all the strategy, and that's where it comes to really trusting your recovery and remarketing partners to help guide you in those aspects.
Jerry, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but your current auction also handles non-auto. And do you see, and some of the lenders in the room are lending on non-auto, even though it's an auto finance summit. Do you see differences in approach between what these guys have been talking about?
No, at all of our locations across Canada, yeah, we have non-auto, and we clean them. We take pictures of them just because, and get all the information. We take the non-auto product and we treat it exactly the way we do with auto, or vice versa, or however they want to explain it. At the end of the day, the more information, like, trying to think of the right phrase, because the phrase in my head would probably be not the right one, but clean cars sell. Anything that's clean sells, whether it be a house, whether it be a car, whether it be a non-operable unit. If it's clean and it looks good, 9 times out of 10, you're going to get interest on it. If you have a vehicle or a non-operable product sitting there and it's got caked with mud, or the tires don't match, are you going to get the same type of bidding on it and getting the same type of value? So clean cars sell.
Do investments into things like pre-sale inspections make a big difference ultimately in what sellers are able to get at the end of the day?
I'll jump in. Looks like you might want to also. Yes, we have a few customers who are doing that now. So again, when it comes to an auction, a lot of what we do is visual, right? It's cosmetic. We're taking lots of highly detailed pictures. Of course, we're cleaning up the vehicle. But there's also another step to that, and that's the mechanical side of it. Is the transmission good? Does it go through all the gears? Does the engine sound right? Is the audio, is the noise coming from the engine right? Most auctions, when they're doing condition reports on vehicles, when they, most of these repos arrive at between 2 a.m. and 6 a.m. They're not coming in during business hours. You're taking some pictures, you're cutting keys. It's kind of a basic inspection to get the car, enough pictures to be able to market it. By going that extra mile and providing either a mechanical clean bill of health or a mechanical assessment that says, hey, we have gone over this with a fine-tooth comb, we've road tested it, we will tell you that the transmission's clunky, we'll tell you that the engine's shot, so that your buyer has a more kind of informed decision-making on that car. That goes a long way to build buyer confidence. And when it comes to setting yourself apart in an auction lane as a seller, it doesn't matter if it's repossessed car, OEM car, rental car. What you can do in terms of building your brand is build that buyer confidence. If the buyers know, hey, they've spent this extra money to do a mechanical assessment, there's 0% or very little chance I'm ever going to have a problem with this or have to arbitrate it. I'm going to buy with more confidence, and I'm probably going to spend more money, and I'm probably going to be in your auction lane more frequently bidding on your cars. So yes, my opinion is that certainly goes a long way, especially with repo inventory, right? What Jerry mentioned is accurate. A lot of the times, people who aren't making their monthly or biweekly car payments are also not doing their oil changes on time or other, fairly critical maintenance. The cars come back in not great condition.
Can I jump in here, Jerry?
Go. Sure.
Thank you.
No problem.
I just want to make sure, because you wanted the mic. And again, just to come back to the point, also understanding the inventory is key. Everything Ryan said, 100% correct. And building buyer confidence, very important. Of course, you're a smart guy. You know what you're talking about. The difference for me specifically, and sometimes the types of vehicles that I see, is if you have a total loss vehicle or something that has front end damage, etc., where we look at it and go, we could get a mechanical inspection, but then you're going to drown X amount of dollars into this vehicle that, well, you're probably not going to fix it. Probably best to just sell it as is, where is. That's our job, to provide you with that data so you aren't spending that extra money on it. There are definitely circumstances where you need to have a pre-sale inspection, a mechanical inspection, but there are also circumstances in which you don't, and that's why understanding the type of inventory that you have at the auction at that time, the condition it's arriving in, is really important, so you're not sinking costs into assets that you don't need to be sinking costs into.
My turn?
Your turn.
Okay.
You may go.
Everything that everybody said on the panel makes total sense. But the other big thing is that when we do an inspection, not only are we finding all these things, but we're letting you guys know what's wrong with the car. So then, therefore, you guys are declaring the vehicle properly. You have enough information to go back to your lender and say, hey, listen, I know we got 15 grand in it, but the engine's seized and the tranny's slipping from second to third and it's worth 9 grand. It's all about giving information, whether it be the condition reports, whether it be the pictures. It's giving you guys the information so then you guys can price the vehicles the best way that you guys can.
Just one final question to kind of wrap things up, and it's a bit of a pivot from the themes we've been focusing on, but it's reflective of market dynamics that we've all experienced since COVID, which is ultimately that kind of the old world view of auction value was ultimately fleet, lease return, rental, repo. But we're now seeing OEMs and captives really retaining a lot more of that clean inventory, leaving the open auction lanes disproportionately repo heavy. And ultimately, what is the impact on the lenders in the room when that happens, and who's most at risk when these hierarchies collapse? Ryan, you want to take that first?
Okay. That's an interesting question. I mean, it is true, at least I think it's true from what we've seen with the market dynamics over the last couple of years is you could take a look at the three of us, you could take a look at any other, auction or wholesale company in Canada. I still think to this day, coming out of the pandemic, probably the bulk of the majority that's running through auction lanes that's being sold in a wholesale marketplace. Repossessed assets make up a large chunk of that still. I think we're just getting to the point where we're starting to see some more off-lease units come into the open market and maybe some, ex-rental cars and fleet cars starting to come back, but definitely slowly. So from a residual and data perspective, you have to keep in mind that, what the residual value companies have been seeing in terms of data for the past few years have generally been the worst of the worst transactions. If all they're looking at is wholesale auction data, that's generally based on the worst cars that you're getting in that inventory mix, because it is heavily skewed by repossessed vehicles. On that note, it is interesting too. All of us deal with generally licensed dealers, right? We only sell from our channels to dealers. Once you get into that dealer mentality and that dealer world, it's very interesting to see how different the dynamics are between the used car manager and the F&I office. You have, one buyer, one dealership where you have two individuals that are operating completely against each other. And what I mean by that is, you have one guy in the F&I office who's saying, hey, this Honda Civic is worth $5 grand more. Like, give me a stretch on LTV. Like, I need the stretch. Give me 180%. Meanwhile, you've got the used car manager in the auction lane saying, oh, I can't give you 10 grand for that. It's only worth 7. Like, that's a piece of crap. There's no way I'll give you that. So the dynamics are very, very interesting, and the type of data that's getting fed back into the market, I think we definitely need to ask more questions about is where's that data coming from and what type of inventory is it making up?
Okay, so really to wrap things up on this, I mean, it really does sound like we've moved on from the concept of recovery and remarketing as an afterthought. Ultimately, and Sarah touched on this as well in her keynote, is that if this data and if this information isn't coming back to you as a lender, then your originations decisions, your collections decisions are flying a little blind because you are missing an element that obviously has a fairly hefty impact. So with that, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Great way to end the day. Thank you so much. Yeah, thanks, guys. So let's